In this video, I'm going to be going over part 1 of the review, page 3, focuses questions 22 to 26, and it's going to go over domain and range. In the first question, number 22, we're asked to identify the domain and the range. Domain is going to be the x values, and the x values are going to be going from the left to right. So we take a look, starting from the left. When I first encounter my point, it has an x value of -4. Then I go to the next one. This has an x value of -3, followed by -2. Then we have a -1. And our last is 0. Because none of these values repeated, this is a function. The range is focused on the y values. The y-axis goes up and down. So I'm going to be looking at each point from the bottom up and taking in the y value. So my first point has a y value of -4. The next one is -2, or excuse me, -1. +2. Then we have, let's see, that's 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the last point has a y value of, looks like 9, excuse me, 8. And we have our domain and range. Number 23, once again, we're asked to find the domain and range. This graph is a continuous graph because it has a line segment, which means we're going to have to use our inequality symbols. So domain, x values, so I have my x, and then I have my less than symbols before and after. I'm still going to be going from the left to right because that's where our x values are. So from the left, when I first encounter the graph, I see it's got an x value of -4, and I also see it's got a closed circle. So I'm going to put my -4 on the left, and then I'm going to underline my inequality symbol to represent the closed circle. And then I'm going to look to see when the graph comes to an end, which may not always be where a point is. And that's okay. So here I look and I can see it ends at a x value of a +5. And it's also a closed circle. So I'm going to underline the inequality symbol. The range, y values. So I have my y with my less than symbols before and after. And then I'm going to go from the bottom up because the y axis is vertical, it goes up and down. So starting from the bottom, I can see my graph has a y value of a -5. Once again, the circle is closed, so I'm going to underline. And then I'm going to look to see where the graph comes to an end. And I can see it is at 3. What happened there? Okay. So here we have 3. And I close the circle because that's where it ended. So on this one, same thing, finding the domain and range. This graph is continuous. So once again, I'm going to use those inequality symbols. I have my x and my less than symbols before and after. We're going from left to right. So from the left, I first encounter the graph at a -3. It's an open circle, so I'm going to leave the inequality symbol alone. And then when the graph ends, I see it's got an x value of 1, and the circle here is closed, so I'm going to underline. The range is the y values, and remember, y values go up and down because the y-axis goes up and down. So I have my y and my inequalities before and after. From the bottom to the top, the bottom is going to be wherever the graph is, not necessarily if you have a point. So here, because where the graph ends, I have a value of -4. I do have a closed circle, so I'm going to include it. And then going all the way up to the top, I have two ending points. They both have that value of 0. Because I have an open circle, and over here, there's no indication if it's open or closed, I'm going to go ahead and go with or equals. The only time I don't is if I have that open circle or an arrow. The other thing I want to point out is that this is represented by f, which means this is a function, and we can see none of the x values repeat. It passes the vertical line test. So another way you may see, or you will see on your exam, is the range represented as -4 is less than or equal to f of x is less than or equal to 0. Remember, f of x is the same as y. When you're looking at a mapping diagram, much like a table, you're given the x values on the left and the y values over on the right. So when you're writing your domain and range, because we have a list of points, we're going to write them out as a list. And you should write them in numerical order. It doesn't matter how many arrows you have, you're just writing that first column of numbers for your domain. The range would be the numbers in the second circle or oval. And once again, it doesn't matter if they have multiple arrows. You're just writing each number once. And then just a little side note, because this 2 from the x values has 2 arrows, this is not a function. So on question 26, we have a graph and is referring to a ball and its height as it's thrown from the top of a building. And so when it asks us what describes the domain and range, it's not asking us to actually identify what the domain and range is, and more of what does it represent, what is it referring to. So domain are our x values. So I want to look at what is this x-axis representing, and that's where the label comes into play. It's referring to our time in seconds. So the domain is the time in seconds. And if we were to indicate the domain, it's going from 0 to about 4.5. So if we were to write it, I would have my 0 is my time, which is the x values. And then looking over at the range being those y values, we would look at the y-axis, and it's referring to our height in feet. So the range is height in feet. If you were to write it out, we're talking about our height. And the height goes all the way to the ground, so it gives it a value of 0. And then the highest marking is about 95. Once again, I don't see an open circle, so I'm going to go ahead and include those values. That height, range, the y values. And then it's asking, what does the y-intercept represent? The y-intercept is where it begins on the y-axis, which is right at 30. So this is 30, and I look to see feet. 30 feet is the starting point, or starting height. And then it asks for the x-intercept. That's that 4.5 time. If this ball's talking about how the height as it was thrown from the top of the building, that ball went into the air, reached a maximum height of 95, and then it came back to the ground at 4.5 seconds. It was in the air for 45 seconds. And that's what that x-intercept is representing.